The UK is a nation of immigrants. Now you hear that all the time, from the mouths of politicians, the media and academia, social activists as well. This idea is repeated so frequently and with such casual authority that it's no wonder that it's lodged itself in the subconscious of the entire British public. But here's the problem. It's not true. When people repeat that slogan, they're collapsing thousands of years of complex organic civilization into a catchphrase that means to justify and normalise the mass immigration policies of the last couple of decades. And they do this without acknowledging the essential differences between populations that form over thousands of years and rapid demographic transformation within the last handful of decades. So let's explore why this nation of immigrants narrative is not only inaccurate, but it's also harmful to the dignity of the native population of Britain, and by extension to really any Western European country these days. And if you like the video, do the thing the algorithm likes, really helps a small channel out. We're even moving up in the world. We've got this mic stand made out of 100% pure Chinesium, so hopefully that makes some difference. Now, one of the most common arguments you hear, people who perpetuate this myth, is that the people of the British Isles are already a multicultural mix. They'll say we're a mix of the Celts, Danes, Normans, Romans, Saxons, Celts. So in their mind that we've always been multicultural. And at first glance, if you don't know anything about history or where these people actually come from, this might actually sound somewhat compelling. A list of historical people certainly sounds diverse, but if you take a closer look, now let's visualize this on the map. Let's draw a circle to cover where all these groups have had influence of Britain's civilizational development over the past several thousand years. Every single one of these groups was ethnically European, often from neighbouring regions. They shared common ancestry, culture, climate, and even core language roots. Over time, these groups fought, intermarried, integrated, and then formed what became the English, the Scots, the Welsh, and the Irish. To call this gradual internal European blending immigration in a modern sense is just intellectually dishonest. There were no border control systems, there's no welfare state, there's no international NGOs helping people settle and then extract resources from an already established society. What happened was a slow and often very violent consolidation of tribes and cultures that eventually forged a national identity. And even within the UK, the British Isles, there's still very distinct cultures, even though the people are ethnically the same in many, many ways. Contrast with what we see today, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people from Africa, Middle East, South Asia, arriving into advanced Western nations fully formed with institutions, infrastructure, established cultural norms, and expecting instant inclusion and full benefits, with little to no organic connection to the society of which they're moving into themselves. Migration is not the same as nation building. The people who arrived in Britain centuries, if not thousands of years ago, were not benefactors of an existing welfare state. They were pioneers. They carved out their survival in a raw and untamed land. They built villages, roads, and then government institutions. They died defending their territory. And in essence, they built the civilization from the ground up. Now contrast with what we see today. We have these arrivals brought in with, a lot of the time, taxpayer-funded charities and government schemes. They're immediately housed and fed by the state. And then in a matter of weeks or months, they end up becoming very much statistically overrepresented in violent and sexual crimes. This is not nation building. This is a resource extraction. It's a exploitation of a civilization pre-built. If we consider the UK civilization like a natural ecosystem. Consider like a rainforest. If you begin to introduce non-native species into a natural ecosystem, over time that natural ecosystem is going to be disrupted, and never in a positive sense. Cultural and demographic shifts on the scale of which we're seeing today, within the space of my lifetime essentially. We've already transformed cities and entire regions within the UK beyond recognition. And another popular tactic used by these people who advocate for this propaganda is that they'll use guilt as a means to justify it. They'll say things like the UK colonised the world, so now it must accept the world into its borders because of this historical grievance. This logic is just absurd and selective. If we consider a more normie whataboutism argument, if we consider the Roman Empire, the Mongolian Empire, the Mali Empire, there's no historical grievance that's been perpetuated so strongly to justify the policies of which we have today, focused purely on Western countries. History is full of empires, invasions and colonialism, none of which now logically require the modern descendants of these civilizations to then dissolve their borders and accept unlimited immigration. This so-called moral argument has no consistency, no real justifiable end. The only end will be the total destruction of the civilizations of which this mindset has now infected. And then there's the other side of this guilt trip coin. In countries like Ireland, for example, there was no colonial empire that Ireland spearheaded, but the Irish people are still being subjected to mass immigration, perhaps on a even larger scale than what we see in the UK. Because the manipulation goes both ways. They'll say, because you were colonised, you must be then sympathetic to all those who, suffer under oppressive regimes or who are fleeing war, even if their cultures, values and economic interests are polar opposite to yours. So whether your ancestors were conquerors or they were conquered, the answer is apparently the same. Accept mass immigration, demographic change, and accept it without question. And that's not history, that's just ideology used as a weapon against a particular people. And so here's the question that mainstream media doesn't want to even entertain, that if all white majority countries are nations of immigrants, where exactly is the homeland for European people? We're told it's racist to talk about protecting European heritage or identity, but no one bats an eye to say it's racist for the Japanese, the Palestinians, the Nigerians for wishing to maintain their national identity and civilization as a whole. What kind of world are we building and moving into if the answer to that question is just silence or complete disregard? Because this isn't about hating outsiders or fearing difference. Most people are fine with some reasonable level of immigration. If I was to put a number on it, because people like specific numbers of what's the cutoff, I would say 95%. That would be fine for me. That seems like a reasonable figure of which could be absorbed. Consider, again, another metaphor, a civilization's like a big stew. You had a little bit of 5% being spices, that's reasonable. But if you put far too much in, everything is just completely ruined and it's very difficult to salvage. Because mass immigration on its current scale, justified by this pseudo-history enforced through guilt, is just not sustainable, and that should just be obvious for anyone listening. The idea that the UK or any Western society is simply a nation of immigrants is just not only false, but also a tool used to erode the legitimate interests of the native people. And if you think that sounds harsh, then ask yourself, if the British don't have the right to say this is our home, then who does? But that's all I really have to say about that. So if you do like the video, do the thing the algorithm likes. If you thought it was in any way thought-provoking, share your comments down below. Let me know if there's any other topics you would like covered in the near future. And thanks for watching.
Now, earlier in the 20th century, our fathers and grandfathers were told that they fought. They fought against Germany, they fought against fascism, they fought against Imperial Germany in the First War between 1914 and 18. You may have seen some of the very elderly veterans who are basically dying now. 93, 89, 96, 109, 106, 104. As these men went over the top in 1914-18, in Flanders Fields, at the Somme, at Passchendaele, at Ypres and elsewhere, when men got out of their tanks and fried an egg on the side of it in the North African desert in the Second War, were they fighting for tolerance and inclusion? Were they fighting for Mr. Phillips to impose laws upon them here in the north of England and elsewhere to describe what they can say, even in private, even in a text message between friends, even in an office in the public or in the private sector? No, they weren't fighting for tolerance and inclusion. They were fighting for glory. They were fighting for this country. They were fighting for England and Britain. They were fighting for what their old rulers had told them about what the future would be like if they lost. They were fighting for a degree of racial and ethnic pride that was unstated because the whole English conspectus, which didn't really go on about that, because it was accepted as a norm to begin with, and therefore you didn't need to illustrate it too much, because it was a given before you even started. They were fighting for the flags that were behind them. Many of them didn't know what was coming, and certainly didn't know that the Great War was a form of mechanised death, in which we would lose 800,000 men. 800,000! And look around this country now. What did they die for? And many more maimed and injured on top of that core 800,000. And that's just in the First War. What did they die for? Did they die for a multicultural Britain? Did they die for a multi-ethnic Britain? Did they die for a politically correct Britain? Did they die for 200,000 abortions a year? Did they die for the absence of the death penalty? Did they die for liberal censorship that denies the rights even of a private conversation up to a certain perspective? Did they die for the right of men to marry each other and adopt children? Did they die for all of these things? Or did they actually fight for something different?